yes, my sweet, yes, my sweetest. It is that time of the week once again where I torture the people who I think I proclaim to be my friends, but they may not agree after what I've been putting them through. No Louis this week, so my original plan was to have Louis watch a full professional wrestling pay-per-view, a one-off event, which probably will have sequels now, but not with any sort of frequency that you could call it serial professional wrestling, but rather as a one-off spectacle circus comes to town moment. Alas, no Louis, so I've instead decided to spring upon Matt something that I've been threatening for a while. We watched Mobile Suit Gundam, the film trilogy. I guess this is a continuation, for in Matt's experience, it is not so much that Ghazi's Wing is by the creator of Gundam, but that Mobile Suit Gundam, the film trilogy, is from the creator of Ghazi's Wing. Did you see the Ghazi's Wing throughout today, Matt?
Yes, I did. It was very clearly from the same guy. Had many of the same flaws and problems throughout. So yeah, you could definitely tell it was the same director. Sure. Hello, by the way. Hello.
Yes, hello, Matt. I will understand if this is the final episode of this we ever do, and that you never want to see or hear from me again.
I think I'm more just worried that, obviously I'll be here again whenever we do the next podcast, but I'm more fearing for this podcast, just because I'm unsure of my mental state after, how many hours is, these three Gundam movies?
Like 7-ish.
Yeah. It would be...
If you go up to my shelf, you can pull down the DVDs and find the actual minute count.
Oh, wait, no, that's not
No,
it.
that's Mazinger Z.
Maybe I wish it was Mazinger Z. Do I wish it was Mazinger Z?
Yeah, that's fun times.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, I'll, when I see a number, I'll say. But you can keep on going until I do, is what I'm saying.
Making you go
180 minutes. Approximately 180 minutes. I'm guessing that's just one of them?
Yes, that's per film, roughly.
So, I'm not very good at math. Hopefully you can do the math on 180 minutes.
In fact, I can go through. We watched the Encodergasm version of the films, which is a very good encode of the most recent home release from Japan. It also has mixed in the theatrical audio, the early 2000s remixed audio, and the 1996 American VHS dub, which I should perhaps bring up so we can have an audio sample of, because it features a very young Steve Blum as Char Aznavour.
Wow, that's interesting now, actually.
And Bright is British in it.
That I can imagine more easily than Steve Blum as Char.
You know, he's got that real cool voice. I'm gonna betray you, Garma. I guess I should give some background, because last week we did talk a little bit about Yoshiyuki Tomino, the art school graduate turned trainee of Osamu Tezuka and then Leiji Matsumoto, where he learned the craft and technique of arranging a team that can then construct and assemble a piece of half-hour entertainment animation on a weekly basis. My way of trying to say that Yoshiyuki Tomino is not that good at the art thing. And I guess I should talk about the circumstances that led to Mobile Suit Gundam and the movie versions of it. So he moved to Studio Sunrise in the early 70s, worked on a few shows in various dribs and drabs, demonstrating that he had a skill set. He directed the first half of a show called Yusha Raiden, which was an extremely bog-standard for the time robot cartoon. Basically, in 1971, this show called Mazinger Z appeared, which was about a boy and his robot, and they gotta stop the bad people. It's got some fun imagery going on. There's this recurring motif of, if you've got the Mazinger Z, it can grant you the power to be a god or a devil. What will you do? And generally, Koji Kabuto will either choose to be a god, or accept his own mortality and just try to do the right thing anyway. But it very much establishes, boys find robots, they stop the bad people with them. And that's what Yusha Raideen does, indeed. The director of Combat Levy and Volts 5 took over for the second half of the show to ensure that its production would get completed. But people at Sunrise were happy with what he did, so he then directed a show called Zambot 3. And that starts off with a bunch of kids finding a robot, which is convenient because some aliens are invading. And they know how to pilot the robot because their grandfather helpfully tells them that, oh yeah, I've been conditioning you while you sleep to be able to fight the alien invasion yourselves. And what follows from that creepy setup is a bunch of kids learning that when you've got a cool magic robot to fight the aliens, lots of people are going to die. And in fact, you're going to die as well. Especially when one of your crew members gets bombs implanted in her and they detonate. And also kill your dog. So from this terrifying children's show, telling children that everything they love and dream of is a lie and is vile and disgusting and they should run away from robots immediately, he then makes an action comedy called Daitan 3, where a pastiche of Roger Moore's James Bond fights bad people with a 100-meter tall robot. And from there, he then starts to come up with the idea with a bunch of people for Mobile Suit Gundam of, okay, there's been these boys in their robot shows all throughout this decade. Maybe we could do like some sort of more serious sci-fi and military drama out of this. And through the design phase and pre-production, there's a lot of arguments with the representatives from the toy company funding the show about how things should look, how pretty they should be, how many toys are we going to be selling. Should we have an adult protagonist or should we have, a cool teen? Because the kids like teens, right? I mean, when kids want to watch shows about kids, they don't want to watch shows about adults so they can imagine being an adult and a grown-up. That's how kids work. Matt's already face-palming right now, as I'm being facetious. So, it has a very troubled production and has very poor ratings, resulting in the show getting canned 42 episodes in. So they wrap things up, and that's that. They then start to, having demonstrated to some people internally that, hey, we can try to be a bit more adult in our themes, they then make a show called Space Runaway Ideon, which is basically about how people are inherently terrible and will just kill each other the second they meet other people. It's a very bleak show. But during that time, there starts to be a bit of buzz, particularly in a rerun of Mobile Suit Gundam. A bunch of women in particular start to really discuss in the fandom, hey, that show was kind of neat. And a model kit manufacturer called Bandai sees that there's a bit more momentum happening in the discussion of this show. And so they fund a recut of the movies. They fund a recut of the show into a movie trilogy in order to make a bunch of money off ticket sales, as well as getting a broader awareness of this thing, so they can then try and sell it to a model kit crowd, being all, hey look, you like to make model kits of tanks and planes and things, here's some sci-fi military weapons you could play around with. And from there, it proves very successful and makes a lot of money, resulting in a sequel TV show called Zeta Gundam in 1985. And that is when one of the chief fan magazines discussing Gundam, called New Type Magazine, sells a lot of units, and by the end of the show's run starts to become a general-purpose anime magazine, and is to this day one of the leading print magazines in Japan for anime industry news. So here we have these movie trilogy. I mentioned before when we talked about Gazi's Wing that Yoshiyuki Tomino understands how to assemble a weekly half-hour television show, but when he's working in any other format, he's absolutely clueless as to what you're supposed to do. Can you give me some examples of how that occurs in Mobile Suit Gundam, the movie trilogy?
Well, I think to start off with, it starts way too quickly. In the first movie, basically, Zion attacks Zeon, rather. Zeon, the Nazi fascists.
As opposed to, yeah, I'm not gonna go there. There was some potential for some nasty hate jokes, and I'm not gonna do that.
Okay. There's an attack on a colony, which is the colony where our main character lives. And essentially they're trying to stop the Earth Federation. I guess everyone. Do you want to explain like a tiny
Oh,
bit of how?
Okay, the setup is, in the future year of Universal Century 0079, Earth has successfully started moving into space. There's a large amount of people living in space colonies, but the space colony furthest from Earth has been pushing for independence from the Earth Federation, which appears to be basically the one government that actually operates on Earth at this point. Earth is a singular nation, but this colony that's the most distant starts to push for independence. Earth says no, so they go, stuff it, we're going to go to war, and insist that we can do so. They then decide not to use nuclear weapons, but instead grab one of these space colonies and just drop it on Earth. A cataclysmic event which in the full lore of Gundam strikes Sydney, and means that Australia basically has this huge hole where New South Wales was. This results in both sides coming to an agreement that, well, I mean, we're gonna kind of have a war, but I think we need to set down some rules about mutually assured destruction, because we'd all like to be alive by the end of this. And that basically causes a stalemate for the next 8 months or so, as Zeon have a technology advantage, they have a financial advantage, but Earth has a land advantage and a manpower advantage. So they're basically stuck in this stalemate position, but the inciting incident here is that Earth has been developing some robots to try and compete with all the robots that Zeon has, and so from there, some Zeon scouts find these robot prototypes, and one of the soldiers decides to break protocol and open fire inside a space colony, setting off the events of the series.
Yeah, and how that leads into like the first example of what you were saying, how this Yokotaro guy has this ability. Apparently, I actually haven't watched any.
Did you just say Yokotaro?
Sorry, what's his name?
Yoshiyuki Tomino.
Yokotaro.
I'll dig up a photo of Yoshiyuki Tomino for you.
Okay.
Start talking while.
Okay. The first example of his apparent ability to make TV shows, but not being able to translate to film, is that right when this first film starts of Mobile Suit Gundam, the first action is essentially that they are attacking, as you were saying, these Zeon forces attack this colony, and so everything starts very quickly, very violently, and this is fine, I think, for any format, to start off things very, very quickly for an opening scene, just to try and get a little bit of excitement, trying to give you an idea of what. Now I see his face. Okay,
it's the most iconic Yoshiyuki Tomino photo, the one of him in front of the Yoshikazu concept art for Mobile Suit Gundam, and him just grinning maliciously at the camera.
But yeah, like it's okay to start. And I think this is okay of any format to start off things very quickly and for an opening scene or two. In TV, they often call it a cold opening of some kind, just like an inciting event. But I think the problem is that usually the idea is that you start it off very fast and you have like a big action scene of some kind to get things going and just get people an idea of where you're heading. But then the idea is that you usually slow things down a little bit, and either you press forward or you go someplace else in the story, and you start to set up your main characters, your themes, your setting. You know, you just the building blocks of a story, I think you would call it. But this doesn't happen in Mobile Suit Gundam's movie. It just kind of keeps on going.
Yeah, you touched on something I wanted to really get to right off the bat here, in saying that normally you'd like stop to discuss like theming or something. You know, like start to present either through your visuals or through explicit words a thesis statement of what your story is about. And the core thing about adaptation, whether you're converting a book to a movie to a TV show to a book, a poem to a song to a TV show, whatever you're doing, the key part of adaptation and the key part of what it means to be faithful to source material is you need to portray the spirit, not the letter, of what you're doing. You need to look at, what is this story about? What is the emotional core? What are the ideas it wants to leave you thinking about? And then you go from there to then actually looking at the process of, what are the strengths of the medium I'm working with, and how can I convey those ideas and those emotions through that medium? What happens here is that since we've gone from a TV show to a movie, there's this incredible fixation on following the beats and a sequence of events that are analogous to the television show. So rather than, here is this shocking moment of violence and young people getting flung into war, what we are instead left with is, shocking moment of violence, people are flung into war, and now we're going to meander around, picking up pieces of items and saying words to each other to demonstrate that we understand the procedure of how to communicate that we need to disembark from a ship. For minutes to tens of minutes to hours of time in these films do not need to be there, because the ideas have already been discussed, and since there's so many of these trees appearing that you miss the forest, there's this joke that floats around. I'll see if I can find a copy of it. The thing. Basically, it's a picture of... It's an MS Paint drawing of the Gundam firing its beam rifle, and in the beam rifle are the words, "War is bad." And then there is a person looking at the Gundam, ignoring the beam rifle shot and saying, "Wow, cool robot." Let's see if I can find a copy of it.
Well, even if you can't, I'm sure you can probably put it in a link to in the podcast notes.
Here we are. Just so Matt can see it. War is bad. Wow, cool robot. And the movies do this. They're so fixated on showing just these moment-to-moment things, the procedure of engagement, the way that you need to move from place to place, that it forgets what is the point of showing you going from these places to places. Where are the characters going? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? And in turn, how is this illustrating war is bad? But it's so bogged down with all these moments that you lose the message. It's so easy to just be the wow cool robot guy, because the text of the film keeps distracting you and often boring you, so you're not thinking about anything. You're just admiring the brief moments of creative storyboarding that occur. I'm sure that Matt will recall, say, that time Azaku kicked a ball into a GM. Classic.
It had a lot of neat little moments in visual moments. Correct, I would say. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I absolutely agree, and it's probably very mean because I don't know this person personally. I don't know who he is or how he acts around people or how intelligent he might be or just what it might be like to talk to this person, what he's like in day-to-day life. But I'm getting such a poor picture of him from these movies. Yeah, that he just seems like... He kind of seems like an idiot. Like, he kind of seems like someone who you would not want to talk about film or television or any kind of storytelling with at all. And it feels like... It looks like he feels like that kind of guy who... I think everyone kind of knows, like either a fan fiction writer or someone like who's just started writing in like high school or something like that, who doesn't seem to understand that a story isn't just a reporting of events that happen in sequential order. And that's such a basic thing that it feels kind of like... It feels very mean that I don't think he understands that, because I feel like a professional who has been doing this for now, how old did you say he was?
He's in his 70s.
He's in his 70s now. When did he start?
His first full production is like 1976.
Sure. So that's like, what, 40,
yeah,
50 years?
He's had a roughly 40 plus year long career
the idea that he doesn't understand how stories work on even a basic fundamental level... Like, it sounds like one of the most horrible things you could say about someone. I'm essentially calling him an idiot, but it's hard not to come to that conclusion based on what I've seen from him so far.
And it's so fascinating when you do dig into the history of Yoshiyuki Tomino and the decades he spent passionately fighting for art in mass media and doing everything he can to spite the investors who are demanding certain things from their entertainment product. That... Like, he's passionate, but he really doesn't know what he's doing most of the time. But you get these little brief flashes of amazing inspiration. And I think there are some broad stroke ideas that he wants to convey in the way some of these movies are constructed. Because the TV show, I guess we should really, really highlight just how many of these scenes are so flagrantly just the middle parts of episodes of a TV show. Because in a TV show, you'll get some establishing shots, some things that'll set the mode, the tone rather. Then the plot will play out, and then you'll get this resolution. And there's certain things you can do, usually like, say, return to some landscape shots. You use things like the setting sun to indicate time has passed, and this week's events are over. There's certain sorts of musical swells that you can use, and the movie keeps all those in. But it just doesn't have the next time, the previously, and the opening and ending credits, and the commercial break eye catches. So there's just so many of these things where it's just, this is just an episode of the show, with all the bits that make it television removed, just plonked in here, in a movie which doesn't need them.
There's only so many ways you can say something is broken. And I was thinking, like, while I was watching this, like where does this rank in, like, the pantheon of, like, the movies that I haven't enjoyed on this podcast? And it's because while I didn't like Ben-Hur, or I didn't like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and there's, like, the other anime one, the one that was also in 3 parts.
Kizumono.
Like, that was vile in, like, that had a very... Like, it was vile to watch.
You had a visceral gut hatred for what was happening on your screen there.
But with this, I don't think I've ever watched anything that just feels so fundamentally broken. Like, I understand that this is a very subjective thing, entertainment and art and all that kind of thing. Like, to say something is bad or wrong is always going to be, like, your personal opinion. But this feels like almost the most objectively broken thing that I've watched on the podcast. Like, as I was saying, it felt like seeing a practical item, like some kind of tool or like a building or something. Like, it feels like something in the real world that is broken. You can't say that, no, actually, from a certain point of view, this tool or whatever is actually fine. It could be very useful. It's like, no, it's broken. It doesn't work. It's not...
We have found the visual media equivalent of Gary Larson's cow tools, is what you're saying.
It's a defective item. Like, I feel like... I said this as well. I feel like you could give this DVD, like, we didn't watch on a DVD, but I believe Adam does have, as like he said before, we have a box here that is the movie Gundam Mobile Suit Gundam, the 3 movies. I feel like you could take this back, and while yes, the discs work, I feel like the movie itself is so fundamentally broken that you could return this as a defective item. Like, it's not a movie. It's just a random bunch of, like, scenes from a TV show pasted together in a slapdash fashion, and it doesn't work at all. It's broken. And I'm just going to keep repeating myself if I keep going. So I'm gonna.
So what I'll say here, okay, in attempting to grok what is going on in these things, and what I think Tomino is trying to do, this is something I mentioned while we're watching it, and so I'll mention it again for the show. Is the TV show has an incredibly cheesy 70s opening. Like, stand up, Gundam. Show that you're strong, show that you're brave. When the forces of darkness are bearing you down, then you just gotta shoot your way through and rise up. Incredibly cheesy, heroic 70s opening. Which sets a certain sort of tone for what's going on. And on top of that, the soundtrack to the show is gloriously disco. I should probably actually dig up some of the music right now, just so you can hear. That's the wrong button. But I'm going on here. This is just an excuse to have Gallant Char popping up in the podcast, if I haven't already edited it in earlier in the thing. Let's see, we punch in this, and we might get it. Okay, let's punch in. Okay. Okay, here we go. Wait, no.
No?
No, I need to. Just hang on here. Audio. Audio default.
This is advanced tech.
Okay, we got the
podcast.
desktop audio here. So I'll play it again. Let's see how it is in the mix. Way too loud.
Or maybe just loud enough.
Okay, we got it. We got it there.
Okay.
That should be good. So, how groovy is this?
It's definitely a far cry from what the movie is going for usually. Like, you can... It changes everything, doesn't it? You're right.
Yeah. So you have music like this playing, and you can tell here, like, there's these suspenseful string chords and this minor key, while also maintaining this disco beat. There's this pacing, there's this rhythm, there's this sense of villainy and tension in the air. And now we start to get the key change. No, it's not the full key change yet. We're going to have a bit of a keyboard solo here. This song is called, generally translated as either Dashing or Gallant Char. It's one of the several songs that Char has whenever he's doing stuff.
It's strangely heroic and also lighthearted for a main villain who is essentially a Nazi. I'm surprised to hear that it's Char's theme instead of like Umbero's or just a general
Char has
heroic...
Char also has a vocal theme that pops up,
Ah.
which is singing about how cool and tough he is and how he's going to bop you, basically. It's great. And it had an official music video, which is all the clips of Char just like kicking Amuro in the head. And here you see, like, we're getting to this build and this swell. This is good radio right here, isn't it? And now, here we have moved to the refrain of the opening theme.
So he actually is the main character. The opening theme is
yeah.
literally in his theme song.
So, we have this sense of tension and excitement that then builds to this heroic triumphing over the bad people that occurs consistently throughout the soundtrack of the TV show, and it gives it this certain sense of weird adventure while also being some tension and drama. But the movies have basically none of this. They will use maybe the first 20 seconds of any track that's from the TV show soundtrack, and then it will just cut out, and you won't hear music for another 20 or so minutes. I think that what they're trying to do is not only have a more serious tone by doing this, but also with the way that scenes just move from scene to scene to scene, you have very few jumps in time scale. Basically, it's whenever White Base is just crossing an ocean are the only real gaps you have. So, I think what the films are trying to go for is this sense of constant war. That at any point in time, you're going to be fighting and people are just going to die. And that's just something that happens when you're in war, and that's why one of the reasons that war sucks. That's what I think it's trying to go for. But the fact that I have to be going on this weird long tangent in order to convey this demonstrates what is a consistent thing about stuff that these movies try to do, which is, it doesn't really work.
Yeah, it does. There's so many different things I want to talk about with that, but I guess continuing on from that point, I think it does is that it undervalues and undercuts anything that comes before, because it not only is everything seeming to be very abrupt, which can kind of undercut how important something is. I feel like often if you want to have an important event of any kind in a story, sometimes you can do it abruptly, but a lot of times it's nice to build up to it, to develop something, and because that can kind of give, like, honestly, people might not like to hear this because everyone likes things now these days, but sometimes I feel like even just the inertia of a long-running plotline, even just by the time spent on it, can give it a kind of important feeling. Like, obviously there are better ways to do it, but like just time itself can be a big factor in making a plotline important.
Yeah, if a wrestler continues to win over a long period of time, then like they will have a certain level of gravity to when they actually lose.
Yeah, and there's no way they can win well enough in a short period of time to be as good as winning over a period of time. They can't, even if they went into the building on their first day and beat literally everyone, it wouldn't be as effective as a really long-running victory streak. And in the same way with this movie, it means that everything kind of just feels so abrupt, and so it kind of feels less valuable and less important than it should be. It also feels kind of dumb at times, and it also means that usually because it's trying to jump to the next thing so quickly, even if it wasn't undercut before, it's undercut straight after anyway. Like each plot line, I mean, because it will be forgotten about in the next 30 seconds.
Yeah, there was this running gag that developed in the second half of the second movie, all the way through the third, where you would just bring up character beats that had occurred earlier that were not impacting how the characters make decisions at the scene we were in. I could say, hey, remember that time that Amuro was really shell-shocked and incapable of moving? Remember that time he buried the Gundam and rejected a threesome proposition?
It's just kept on going. I think another running gag was the idea that if whenever we were upset with a plotline, which was a lot, we would just say, well, whatever, it won't matter in the next 5 minutes, it's going, and it will be gone. So there's, I think, were the 2 running gags that we had throughout the whole film.
and to be pretentious again like that does result in, to a certain degree, of a sense of transience in the text, but that is not interesting, and you have to really be digging for that. You don't come out of these movies thinking, war's terrible and we need to be finding ways to resolve it and prevent it from happening and, in a way, moving beyond the idea entirely. Because it can't focus on any one emotion long enough for you to really grok that. It's a sci-fi episode, so I'm using the word grok. Look at how hip I am. Stranger in a strange land, everyone! Woo!
I guess I would be very interested to know. Like, I shudder to... in one way I'm interested, in one I'm not, because I have, like, an intellectual curiosity, but also an emotional... like, I kind of want to see... In one way, I want to see, like, what an actual TV show with this guy looks like compared to a movie. There's an emotional side of me that just wants to forget about this guy forever because of this experience. But, like, it's very... I understand that editing can be a very powerful tool. And it means that as bad as this has been, as horrible as just... They're so fucking bad. Like, these movies are all so terrible. As terrible as they were, I do wonder whether, in a different format, the one that he's apparently good at, whether any of the things like war is bad or any of the themes that he apparently wants to do actually come across and work.
And certainly this is the third full show that he directed and is then reconstructing, so, it's still early in a career. Like, you're getting to there what was going to be one of my ultimate closing questions.
Oh, sorry.
Would be, because something I'm trying to build to is a narrative that there's a lot of disparate parts in these movies. Like, an argument that I was making throughout, when you'd say, hey, that's neat, throughout them is, like, everything that Mobile Suit Gundam needs to be a good movie trilogy is in this trilogy. But the parts are arranged in the wrong order, and they're cut in the wrong way in order to achieve what they need to do. And so what I was going to get to is, like, would you be interested in seeing either more of Tomino's work, just to... This is what Gundam often is to me, and the works of Tomino in general, is this long-standing point of fascination of someone who's so close to really understanding the things that he wants to do, but he just can't. And at the same time, how something so incredibly flawed was able to capture generations of people's imaginations. And it's because there's good ideas in here. There's creativity floating around, but not the technical skill in order to really achieve that vision.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a little less generous, and maybe that's mean.
That's why you don't have a pile of Gundam DVDs sitting on the shelf.
I mean, like, it's not that hard to have a base level understanding of what could be an interesting plot point. Like, even a small child, if you ask them what would be a good story, could probably say something that would be like, yeah, that's a fun story. Like, even if they said, I want a hero to fight a dragon to save a queen, I could imagine a small child saying that. And that, yeah, you're right, that's a good story.
What if the kid says, I wanna take the bombs off the Gundam factory and drive a Jeep? I can't stress enough, one of the things that occurs in the second film is that there's a factory that the Federation has, which contains a bunch of new mobile suits being produced. Mobile suit is the name for robots in Gundam, by the way. The Gundam is a type of mobile suit. It's a name like Zaku or Goof or GM.
Don't turn into Anno here, where you have to just say everything's designation and how everything works.
Yes. Every time an R79D ball appears on screen, we must label it. The MS-06 Zaku 2.
Slide aside, I think this Anno guy and this Tomino guy would get along a lot. I really think that they would. They'd hit it off.
There's an urban legend that Hideaki Anno wound up the way he did because he asked Tomino to sign an autograph, and Tomino said, "Gundam sucks, move on."
That's amazing. That's a good story. I guess I would just say that, like you say that he's, like, the way you put it was that he has a lot of passion for it, and that he's so close but doesn't quite get it. I guess I would take issue, or at least I would raise a question of whether he is close. Because this seems like it. After watching something that's just so terrible, it's hard for me to imagine that this guy is close to making something good. Like it. I mean, even if there are like disparate elements, like they're so vague. Like, and most of them are just visual elements that are just like, oh, that's a cool shot. Like you could say, like, yeah, the main hero having PTSD is interesting, but like, I don't know. I'm not sure if he is close. I'm not sure if he has any talent or skill at all. And considering how old he is now,
he's never going to achieve it.
Yeah, I mean, there's
Reconquista in G is a hilarious fever dream, but I can guarantee you would hate it.
Yeah, he doesn't seem like the kind of person who will ever learn. And like, I understand that he's 70 now, so that's an easy thing to say. But even if I was living in, like, if we were, like, took a time vortex and we were back whenever this Gundam movie came out, and he was probably, like, in what, his 30s or 40s at that point? 30s. I would still say this is not a person who can learn. This is a person who just, like, he just seems like a really bad, like, casual hobby writer, not a professional. Like, he seems like someone who doesn't understand how stories work at all. And yeah, I just can't imagine him. I think the difference between you and me with this guy is that you find him fascinating. For me, I just want to not look at him or, like, think about him, because it makes me feel sad, and I feel like secondhand embarrassment.
Okay, let me take you to. So he directed a couple of shows after Gundam. Ideon. From memory, it's Ideon, then Aura Battler Dunbine, then Zabungul, then Elgaim, I think. And he builds up and then the sequel to Gundam, Zeta Gundam. Here is the thing I'm going to tell you.
Okay.
Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam's the way that I've always read the show is it is a story that accurately conveys a negative facet of war that so few other things discussing war do, which is the intense boredom of war.
Okay.
And this is something that you look at actual accounts of people who have fought in war, is you spend so much time on edge, knowing you could die, but just nothing happens for minutes to hours to days, and then one day the person next to you gets shot in the head and that's it. And the way that it achieves this is by being a weekly procedural television show where the episode starts with an establishing shot of their ship, the Argama, flying. Then a couple of people will do some things that establish the conflict for the episode. You'll go for about 8 minutes of them bantering back and forth. An alarm signal rings, which indicates that the enemies, the Titans, have appeared. You then get stock footage of everyone deploying to engage. Cut to the commercial break. Back from commercial break. Fighting. Everyone fights. Some no-name grunt will get shot in the head. Then maybe the Titans will get the upper hand on the Aeug, or the Aeug will get the upper hand on the Titans. Something will break that upper hand, so it's back to the stalemate. Everyone, since they're all competent soldiers who mostly understand the correct procedure, will then see that the correct thing to do is retreat. So everyone retreats. You'll get some line referencing the inter-character conflict from earlier in the episode, establishing shot of the Argama continuing through space. It does this for tens of episodes in a row. And unlike... You can see from the chunks of episodes we've had that, there is some degree of conflict and tension going on. It's delivered in a flat way, but, it's like, hey, there's this girl who's a spy on the ship. Hey, we've got this prisoner on board who's broken out. We've got some enemies disguised as civilians, or someone's had a tantrum and run away. How will we get them back? Like, there are things like that happening. But Zeta Gundam, everyone is so goddamn competent at being a soldier, besides Cuts, that it's so boring. It's just people making the process of war, and that is not a thing that's exciting. So I say this, and this sounds like an interesting concept. But then you realize you're going to be watching, essentially, 50 episodes of a boring war sci-fi. And that doesn't sound like good television, does it?
No. No, it doesn't. So what is the moral of this story that you've weaved about this show about boring war?
I think what I'm getting to here is that he does improve in his competence at constructing a theme and a tone and an emotional response from the audience. But at the same time, it means that he continues to... He gains that competence while essentially still making bad television. And, that is the sort of thing that I find interesting and will make you just leave the room and do some exercise. And that's fine.
Well, to me, my alternate, version of that is just, maybe you're right. Maybe he did want to make a show about how boring war was, so he constructed it well. Or maybe he's just so used to making boring procedural television that he just... That
he fluked into it?
Yeah, it sounds more like a fluke to me. How many TV shows did he make? Sounds like he made a lot.
Okay, let's see if I can remember them all without checking Wikipedia.
Okay.
So, first half of Raiden, I'm just gonna put that here. I mean, that's 26 episodes he did.
It's a fair amount.
Zambot, Daitan, Gundam, Ideon, Dunbine, Elgaim, Zabungle. Zabungle's an absurdist post-apocalyptic Wild West comedy, by the way. Then Zeta Gundam, first half of Double Zeta, which is also an absurdist comedy. I think he was going for, trying to perceive war as being inherently absurd, and thus not a thing that you should be pursuing, but it's an incredible failure. Then he does Char's Counterattack, but that's a movie. Then, after that is Gundam F91, Victory Gundam, Ghazi's Wing, Brain Powered, Turn A Gundam, King Gainer, and I think after King Gainer there's nothing until Reconquista and G. So we're at 17 shows.
Okay, so this is clearly a person who puts a lot of product. He makes a lot of these things, and
he meets his business KPIs.
Yeah,
as much as he complains about it.
You obviously know more about this guy than I do, so I'm gonna defer to your.
Okay, let me put it this way: he's the guy who frequently cites Peter Pan as the film that inspired him.
Okay.
I hate that movie.
I'm gonna ultimately defer to your version of that. What's that? Sorry, what is it called again? The TV show about boring war?
Oh, Zeta Gundam.
Zeta Gundam.
It's up there on the shelf, Matt.
Oh, okay. Zeta Gundam. I'll defer to your interpretation of it, but I will at least give an alternative that he seems to make a lot of TV shows that are very procedural and boring and very competently constructed and very similar. He seems to make a lot of these shows about war. Surely at some point he was going to luck into that kind of interpretation of, well, maybe he wanted it to be boring because that was the theme. I don't know.
And in turn, if we ascribe to death of the author, does that matter then? If it was intentional or not? If that is a text that people can see and get that emotional response from?
It doesn't matter for that.
Do the ends justify the means, Matt? I'm gonna grab some water, you talk.
Okay. Oh, wow, that's a long journey to water. It doesn't matter in terms of that particular text, it does matter in terms of whether I want to watch more from this guy, because then it's difference between whether a certain text can be interesting to a person. So, like, can Zeta Gundam be an interesting thing to watch, depending on your point of view? But that's different than me asking myself the question of, is Tomino the kind of person that I'd want to watch TV show from, or even a movie from? And I would argue that on this evidence, I would say no. And I don't think the fact that he lucked in, or perhaps on purpose, either way, that he once made a show that was very boring, even if that might have been the point, is going to...
Uniquely, remarkably boring.
Yeah, okay. Uniquely boring. I don't know if you want to... Is that on the box somewhere as, like...
Let me check. Let me see the quotes.
Alright, I'll pull one down. Here you go.
Zeta Gundam is one of those shows that everyone should watch.
Wow.
I'm not making it up. That you can see that. You can verify my claim.
Where does it say this? Oh, wow, it's right at the top there. Yeah, I really trust America for their views.
Oh, here's one from Protoculture Addicts that's a Macross fan site. A timeless classic.
Jesus.
Zeta so far is winning me over with its nods to its predecessor, but also in how it's carving out its own path. From AnimeOnDVD.com. That is a pull line from someone who didn't watch the show, but was paid to do the review. And so they're just saying vague banalities because they know it's a sequel.
Topical.
An intense epic drama for adults, far ahead of its time. This was after Armor Trooper Votoms and Dogram.
Now we're having a go at, like, quotes from anime reviewers.
Still the finest, ...
This is how boring Gundam, Mobile Suit Gundam, the trilogy was, that we're having to, like, just scramble for other things in Adam's, like, shelf.
I'm just exploring things that we've got going on here.
That is true. Oh, hello. Adam is showing me a Big Zam, is it called? Zam or Sam?
You win the prize, Matt. You want to know what the prize is? You get to watch more Gundam.
Oh, great.
Yes. I was just pulling out this super deformed Big Zam model that I painted and built many years ago.
I will say, I think we can probably move to a different topic.
Go ahead.
I will say that while a lot of things look very dumb, visually the movie isn't terrible. Like, it's the Zakus in particular look interesting to me.
Yes, boys.
And the ships look fine. It's very 70s style, but it looks good. It looks good for the most part, even though this is a hamburger on legs with a cannon in the front.
And many other cannons all inside it.
Yeah, that's true.
Look, dude, you look at that and you realize that if this was mass-produced, the feds would have lost in no time at all, man.
Yeah, there's a lot of, like, Nazi super weapon, like, analogies going on.
Yeah, and unfortunately a lot of them are cut that were in the TV show, like the good old Zaccarello, the angry face with knives.
Well, I mean, I say that, but I might be making the same mistake that I was semi-accusing you of, or at least having, like, the idea that you might have, like, I say that there was a lot of analogies to German super weapons, but it could also just be, like...
Oh, no, that's intentional.
Oh, okay. Because it wasn't, like, it's...
Like, Tomino learned from Leiji Matsumoto, whose show has literal space Nazis.
Okay, I was afraid I might be reading into it just because, like...
No.
Obviously, super weapons or, like, new gimmick enemies is going to be important to a TV show, regardless of whether you have Nazi enemies in it. Like, whoever they were fighting for a TV show, you'd probably expect, especially for that kind of a TV show, that kind of procedural, time to fight a new enemy kind of thing.
You know, it's very intentionally dunking on that late-stage Nazi fascination with super weapons, because Nazism is an ideology that leads to a fundamentally broken view on how conflicts work, where you simultaneously think that your enemies are unassailable and thus require the strongest thing possible, but also incredibly weak, that they'll let you build such a thing and one such super weapon will work. So yeah, it's like, let's make a Big Zam, let's make a colony laser, let's make the Zeong.
yeah, if we're going to try and scramble for things the movie did well, that is well represented in the film. In particular, the main... God, was he the main villain? I still feel like Charles was probably the main villain. But who was... what was his name again? The guy
Garen
who took...
Zabi, Mr. Nazi.
Yeah,
Most Nazi.
Garen Zabi, I did like the way that he would change... Like, he'd flip-flop from a position of strength to weakness in, like, the same scene in terms of in verbally talking to people. Like, he would say something like, the Earth Federation is winning, we're on our last legs, and then he would say something like, but we have this super weapon, it's going to change things.
Or sometimes literally, we're close to immortality.
Yeah. Like, it's amazing that to him, he could, on the one hand, be able to say that these enemies are so powerful, and we have to defeat them, and but I have to seize power because we're going to lose if we don't. And then on the other hand, he could be so cavalier and confident. There'd be times where he'd be like, when the final battle was going on, or the carnage. He was just like, yeah, we're winning. Everything's fine. It's just like... And everyone else around him is like realizing, no, this is a pretty, like... This could go either way. This is just carnage and chaos. But no, not him. Everything is fine.
He's Hitler in the bunker.
Yeah.
And he's so deluded that he can't even have the sense to kill himself. Instead, he gets... Okay, that's a very important question. Best headshot in the film. Is it when Kashylia, Giran's sister, shoots Giran in the head? Or is it when Char shoots Kashylia in the head with a rocket launcher?
I think in a better movie, it would be the rocket launcher one, because it would be really satisfying to see who should be a very cool anti-hero character, Char. Doesn't really work, but that's who he should be. Getting his final revenge in such a schlock fashion should be pretty good. But unfortunately, I don't end up liking Char very much. I feel like... I don't know if that's on purpose in the movie, how like his like coolness is very undercut by how much of an asshole he is, and especially in the last movie.
Oh man, like Char is in my notes as talking point.
Okay, but I would say it's actually the sister getting her revenge, because it was just... I don't know, like, especially because
It's good to see the most Nazi guy get shot in the fucking head.
Yeah. And I'm just going to say, like, I feel like these movies aren't very kind to female characters for the most part. They tend to treat them not well.
Yeah, so Yoshiyuki Tomino tries... I'm never sure whether he's a guy who likes to say he's a feminist in modern times because he thinks that's a hip thing to say, but he doesn't really believe it. Or if it is just someone who was a product of his time, but has genuinely tried to learn as much as he can. And as you go over the course of his shows, the competency of women increases dramatically from a Zambot... Yeah, like Zambot where the woman dies, to Daitan where the women are sexy props for the lead, to Gundam where the women fuck up all the time and get slapped, to... You get to, like, there's fairly competent secondary heroes by, like, Dunbine. And then Zeta's also a mess. Though that, I think that might just be, like, the binding of being in the Gundam lore at that point. But you get to, like, Zabungul, where the women kick ass all the time. And by, like, King Gainer, where they have their own sexual agency and stuff. And it's neat. So it's like, I think... It's a case of sign of the times and someone who does actually learn and improve in this respect, but it's rough to watch.
Yeah. And that's why I'm saying that I think the sister shooting the Nazi is the best part. Just because it's like a moment of like he just ignores her. He just tells her straight up that he killed basically her family, basically, right?
Yeah,
like,
I killed your dad with my super weapon.
Yeah, whatever. And he's just
when he's negotiating a peace treaty.
And like, I don't know, it's just a moment of a female character just going, fuck you, and just shooting me in the back of the head, which is fun. So I would, yeah. And it's one of the few good moments for female characters in that movie.
Next point, Matt. Have you got another point you want to get to?
Do I have any more point? I feel like because all three movies are virtually the same. Like, I understand. I guess we should probably talk about the fact the third one is like a new footage and all that. But for me, I think the same problems are repeated over and over again.
There are some differences in the execution, though.
Okay.
Because the third one opens really, really strongly. Much like the second, it has a very TV recap of previous events. But then you've got this pacing. We're back in space. There's a war going on. We need to get to a place. Here's another attack by the Zeon troop forces nearby, including Char. There's this sense of, okay, there's this ticking time scenario. We need to get to a place. There's these people attacking. It's equal parts this real kickstart of getting right back into the thick of the fight, with a sense of familiarity as well, that, like, this is the state of the war. This is a thing that you're doing, is fighting all the time. There's much stronger use of music in the third film, initially, where, like, the music is back and played in full, and so you've really got that sense of tempo in the editing and pacing of the scenes. And it's neat. Then it comes to a grinding halt as we get to Side 6, and all the problems come rushing back. Amuro, the main character, meets his father, who he thought died in the first 10 minutes of the first film, and you get immediately some mood whiplash there, where just, you don't see his father and then slowly realize that he's got oxygen asphyxiation, and he's basically a potato now. It's just immediately, there's my dad. Oh, he's a potato. And now I'm gonna meet a woman, and then I'm gonna crash a car, and you're just jumping from point to point again. And that's when it really starts collapsing. And I think it really hits a peak when where it's trying to discuss some esoteric ideas of maybe as we move to space, humanity will evolve in a way that we can have telepathic communication rather. And in doing so, what it's trying to say is the idea that, hey, maybe then we'll develop ways of getting a greater post-language means of understanding each other, and from there be able to literally evolve past the point of being a warlike species. Not only is this delivered in an incredibly awkward and ham-fisted way with someone who's got, like, a book on baby's first semiotics and symbolism, but it also starts playing pop music at those points, and it's completely out of place.
It's so shit. Like, it's so poorly constructed and done. Like, I can't overstate...
Yeah, but you type oceans.
I can't overstate just how bad these three movies are. Like, they're not bad because of some... Like, as I say, I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit here, but, like, I understand that, like, because Monogatari or whatever has a more, like, vile feel to it. I understand that Mrs. Smith Goes to Washington is very, very boring and has had, like, an kind of a deleterious effect on movies going forward just because of how much inspiration has been made from them. But I just can't overstate just how poorly constructed these films are. They're just made by someone who doesn't understand how to do them. And
yep.
I think, what I was going to say, like, with the third movie, that's when I really start, because this was the second crack, right? This was the second go at it. I'm not sure if we've talked about this before. Maybe you can talk about how the third movie works compared to the first two.
In terms of how it was made?
Yeah.
Oh, it's just, the first two are mostly assembled footage from the TV show, whereas there's a bunch of stuff like, let's have a big dome with that angry face and knives and a rocket booster on it. What a scary super weapon fight.
Yeah.
A lot of the most hammy elements of the final 10 episodes have been cut. And it's mostly new footage that's been animated, but it still does the same bad storyboarding and editing and pacing. So it's this moment of Matt thinking, hey, maybe maybe a movie will happen in here. And then it goes right back to doing the same song and dance that's been driving him nuts for nearly 5 hours before.
Yeah, before I dive into that, it's the idea that it was more ham-fisted. That's insane. I can't... Oh my god.
You don't get the fencing, the robot fencing episode.
Oh my god. Okay, whatever. It was less ham-fisted. Okay, fair enough. What was I gonna say? I feel like, because they had the chance to redo it, and I don't know how much time had passed since then, like how old he would have been. He's saying in his 30s when he made the show.
It was only like a year from the TV show, though.
Okay.
So.
Still, though, he had a second crack at it, and that's where, like, I understand there are some examples of, like, editing being a miracle worker and, like, making something great out of something that is not so great. But I feel like, as important as editing is and how important it is as a storytelling tool, there's only so much you can do, right, with stock footage from a TV show and trying to patch that into a movie. Like, in some ways, you're asking for a miracle there to make a decent movie out of that with the pacing that it requires and all those things. But this is a chance for him. Like, unless I'm getting this wrong, they just redid it, right? They literally redrew it, redid the lines, everything. And to think that they went straight back to this bullshit, like, that's got to be an indictment, right? That's like, this was the chance to make a proper movie, and they went straight back to the same thing. So it kind of suggests that even if they had a chance to redo the entire thing, it still would have ended up pretty much the same. And that's
proven when a movie compilation in 2004 of Zeta Gundam was made, where you can tell when it's a new animated sequence, though, because not only is it a different art style, but there's also CG for a bunch of the action.
Ooh.
It looks awful, but there are fan subs of it by notoriously bad fan subbing group TV Nihon, a group who believe firmly in maintaining the purity of the Japanese language when conveying in English. So you get sentences like, "You Kisama," TL note Kisama is an impolite form of you, and "Sir, the enemy-san has left." But they did fix the sign. But I mean, the movies did fix the toxic gas sign canisters, which didn't say danger on them, they said danga. It's a very good episode of Zeta. Possibly one of the best, because it keeps doing these really good dramatic, congruent temporal edits of reminding you that these canisters of gas are approaching, with these dramatic zooms in on the danga. I'm bringing that up to mention that there's some really bad congruent temporal editing that is cutting things to indicate that multiple events are happening at the same time. There's things where it's needs to set up, say, hey, you've got this ticking time scenario once again of people are setting up this big freaking solar laser and it's going to kill a bunch of people who need to get out of there before it happens. But it only has one or two of those cuts back to remind you, and there are seriously like 15 to 20 minutes between them, so you forget it's happening. The same happens in the first movie, where it's starting to set up that there's a fight occurring at the same time that the preparations for a big public funeral of a deceased royal Nazi is about to occur. But you get one or two of them, then again, there's like 15-minute gap. So then it's just, oh, now this broadcast happens, when you could have cut out most of those 15 minutes and then just established, oh no, there's this broadcast happening and now a Nazi's doing a rallying speech. And the main characters are really coming to terms with what the ideology of Zeon is.
I think one of the reasons why this can be a hard movie to talk about is that, and it shows that you're doing a good job with it, just because you understand some of the more technical aspects of making a story, and because this movie is so broken on such a fundamental level that it can be difficult for me to really, like, I know that it's wrong, but it can be very hard
to vocalize.
Yeah, I feel like if you got like any director worth their salt, or anyone who's involved creatively in any kind of storytelling, would probably have the skills to be able to work out immediately why this movie doesn't work at all, and they'd be like, have their critiques would be like pages long of just seeing wrong thing after wrong thing. Like, I think that one of the problems I had with this was in the final movie with that solar laser you're talking about, where like, and this is such a basic, it's almost a cliche, but at least it works. Like, there's a solar laser that the Nazis have. It's their final super weapon, and they're going to use it just to blow all the good guys up, right? Like, that's the plan. And they launch a final desperate assault. That works. That's fair. It's a fair ending to a story. And there's never any suggestion of how long it takes for that laser to recharge, if they're recharging it, where they're going to aim it if they recharge it. Like, there's no ticking time bomb when the entire thing, like, the entire, like, story and arc demands it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, like, this chaotic fight, and the fact that it's like they just didn't think of it. Like, or Tomino just didn't think of that. The idea that he doesn't think of that is...
I will say he did learn from this.
Okay.
Because the climax of Zeta Gundam has some more Nazis building another... It's an equal part. It's Nazis and also just hard-right Federation government fascists. They're not Nazi fascists. Collaborate to build another goddamn space colony laser. And the actual climax of that fight is about desperately trying to get the control over this thing before it goes off again.
Yeah.
So he did learn.
Like, imagine... it's funny that we keep talking about Star Wars, probably because Star Wars is such a very basic movie done well.
Yeah,
that
while we were
see...
watching, there were a lot of Star Wars comparisons, which
Yeah.
I was expecting because they're the same time period.
Right. And
that's a film which was saved in editing.
yeah, which is interesting. But, like, imagine the Battle of Yavin 4, I believe. Like, wow, look at me being a nerd. The final battle in Star Wars A New Hope. Imagine that, but, like...
Shall we check if that's been retconned as Wikipedia designation in the wake of the expanded universe being canned?
Yeah, that seems like an important use of our time. No, like, I imagine that fight, but there's no going back to the Death Star about to fire its laser. And that would be... Like, it would probably...
Yeah, it would be like they're just shooting over a Star Destroyer.
Yeah, like, it would probably, like, because that is such a good movie, in my opinion anyway, like, it'd probably still be okay, but, like, that element of it, that desperate attempt to stop it from destroying the final Rebel base is such an important part.
It's so cathartic.
Yeah. And the idea that you'd have this super weapon and just not...
Yeah,
like,
it's not brought up again.
It's...
And maybe that's a comment about Nazi superweapons, but maybe it's just bad movie making. You decide. Send a message in the comments. Like, comment, subscribe, click on the bell, get the notifications so you never miss an episode.
That does... I don't know if that's you trying to wrap up, but there is one
No.
last... Okay, that's good.
That's a joke.
Alright, fair enough.
But seriously, do those things.
Yeah, you should probably say whether you...
I've got more things I want to bring up.
Yeah, okay. What was I gonna... Actually, no, you should keep going, actually, because my last point is probably more of a last thing.
One? Okay,
yeah.
then. Let's talk about Shah Razanabal. Tell me your thoughts on Shah Razanabal. Your reading of him, how the text does things. I'm really interested here in just, like, your reading on the character of Shah Razanabal. He is Japan's Darth Vader. He's this villain in a mask from this iconic sci-fi piece.
I feel like...
I hope that didn't impact your reading of me saying that. Just tell me about Char. Let me dig up the Char song.
Oh god. As I talk about him. Well, it's in some ways it can be difficult because I feel like a lot of how I feel about him now has been so impacted by the last movie. I feel like I might have had a different reading of him. I feel, well, okay, to start off, he's a fun villain, right? Like, that's the starting point with him. Like, that's your first impression. I thought he had an incredibly dumb domino mask. That was something that I wanted. I didn't like his character design that much, even though I understand that at least had the effect of it marked him out as special at the very least. So, whatever. It was dumb, but it did its job. He reminded me, like, obviously he was a guy of, like, tremendous pride and who everything was about him. And that while, yes, he probably did have a tragic backstory, he kind of used that as an excuse to make, like, him the star of a drama show. In, like, even though there's a whole universe and lots of people are dying and having horrible lives, it's all about Shah. Because he had a bad thing happen to him once. And now he's going to get his revenge. And
Give it to me. Give it to me.
and everyone is kind of just a stage character in his play. And that's not... I don't think that's something that's shown that much in the start. Like, at first, he's just a fun villain to face off against. So
He's this guy who goes fast and kicks you.
yeah, and he's got, like, some anti-hero... vibes, that's a good way to put it, yeah. Especially in the first and the second one, where you feel like there's a chance he might turn into an anti-hero almost, and be like almost like a Spike kind of character. Hopefully it will work out, you know. Hopefully people relating to this will know who Spike is. If you don't know Spike, you've probably seen a character like him since Buffy, because he's a very popular character archetype. But that didn't work. That's not what happened with him in the end, and instead they doubled down. Well, this is what I think. I don't know what Tom and I wanted. But to me, it really felt like he was almost a subversion of an anti-hero in some ways, or that kind of like fun villain where it turns out, no, he actually is an asshole. He's a huge asshole, and even though he didn't feel like I kept calling him a Nazi, like I didn't.
He does not believe in the cause.
No, he just cares about himself,
Yes.
which can be just as bad, but it's a different kind of thing. I don't want to.
Yes.
He's not like Giran.
Yes, he's not Gurren.
He's not Gurren, but he's just as much of an asshole, and I feel like he's a subversion of like that anti-hero who eventually turns to the good guys because he doubles down on his selfishness. He doubles down on just wanting to get his own way. Like, he clearly doesn't care about the wider universe at all. He pretends to care about new types.
Yeah.
Oh, well, okay, he doesn't care about...
Well, he professes to care about new types so he can get in a girl's pants.
Yeah.
To make her appreciate him.
Yeah. And...
Yeah, I'm so happy, man. I guess I'll get to the broader sense of Gundam canon that there's like 2 readings of Char. And
okay.
You've got my read on him.
Okay. Alright, sure, yeah, I guess, you can continue on then, because I've said what I've said.
Man of pride, okay. So I'll tell you what happens to Char after this. Zeta Gundam is set about 7 years after this show. Okay. And in the wake of the war, the Earth Federation has allowed a private police force to form called the Titans that basically go around roughing up poor people who live in space.
Okay.
They're massive dicks, and also a lot of ex-Zeon soldiers just work with them, like war profiteering types rather than true believers in the Zeon cause.
Okay.
All just kind of join this LAPD equivalent.
Wow.
Space LAPD. And so the central conflict there is basically people who believe in civil rights and certain types of ex-Zeon soldiers forming what they call the Anti-Earth Union Group. Basically, it's a resistance force that's fighting the police brutality. Char is a leading soldier in that group. Though he goes under the name of Quattro Bagina. Rather than a mask, he wears huge aviator sunglasses. That's where, if you've ever seen the "I came here to laugh at you" image, that is Char Aznavour. Also, some romanizations of Quattro Bagina have it spelt as vagina. I guess that's a fun bit of trivia for today. And he's just there as essentially this cool mentor type to the main character of Zeta Gundam. And he has some interesting run-ins with Amuro at a point. In fact, the full context of "I came here to laugh at you" is that Amuro's basically gone back to being whiny and just sitting in a man cave complaining. And a bunch of people tell him, "Mate, like, get out there and help these people. Like, you know the feds are doing the wrong thing." And so eventually they do, and he runs into Char, and Char just goes, "I came here to laugh at you, is what you were expecting me to say, right?" Nah, like, mate, we're cool. Of course, he's saying that because he thinks that's the right thing to do to get respect, because he's Char. He contributes to the fight. He makes a big, impassioned speech to the Earth Federation Parliament late in the show, at the point where there's been enough evidence of the abuses that the Titans are doing to really make a stand. And the head of the Anti-Earth Union group then says, "Hey, Char, like, that's really good. You've got this political potential. Can you help us here? We really need some people to really get this legislation through." And Char goes, "Nah, I'm gonna go back to fighting." Because, of course, Char is all about Char, and he thinks... I think this is important, as I'll get to in a bit. Actually, I'll just get to it now. Char starts off very cool and strong, but he progressively gets beaten back and ultimately utterly outwitted and defeated in every sense of the word by the end of the third Gundam movie. Where it's like, not only did his girlfriend get outgunned in a gunfight, he then gets outgunned in a mobile suit fight, he's then outwitted in an emergency cockpit mobile suit fight, he then loses a machine gun fight, and then he loses a sword fight to a man who's never wielded a sword before. And so when you know that a guy who's had these things happen then says, "I'm going to turn down the political career when we need it in order to go back to fighting," like, there is this sense that he wants to feel like the tough man. He wants to be the cool warrior that everyone loves. And so he goes back to fight and gets his ass handed to him brutally in the climax, just drifting away in the background of the final shot of the show. So he's probably not dead, but, you know, he got bopped real hard. From there, he doesn't appear throughout the next show, Double Zeta Gundam, and instead, while all the remnants of Zeon have been beating each other up, and the remnants of the Titans have been beating each other up, once all the key power players are out of the way, he's so fixated on being this cool tough guy man who people respect, that he then finally becomes that full-on fascist. And he finally gets to that full extremist point where then, after Double Zeta Gundam, he notices that there's a position of power opening up in Neo Zeon, where everyone will treat him as this legendary hero come to give them a new age of prosperity. And so he takes over them and goes, well, I guess the one thing that will prove that I'm really strong and will also let me spout some ideological nonsense to justify my own petty midlife crisis and temper tantrum at this point is I'm going to just start dropping asteroids on Earth, while also fleecing the Federation for money at the same time. And it's from there you get to like the climax of Char's counterattack is basically him spouting the most nonsense drivel that's just this guy only was ever about himself. The most iconic line of which is when he's fighting Amuro and screams, "Lala could have been like a mother to me!" And Amuro's just, what the fuck? That's the sort of guy Char Aznable ultimately is. He is the definitive man-child of anime.
You said there were two interpretations. What's the other one?
The other is the shitty apologist one, where you read him as actually not being a skilled politician, rather just a competent pilot who happened to have birth privilege. And so everything he does is in order to just try and fight the good fight. And ultimately it's because other people push him into a position that he winds up in a position of power. And it's just, no, that's wrong.
Fair enough.
This guy is the most pathetic shit bloke. But he's so cool, and that's how he gets you.
Well, he's cool in the first couple of movies, but that coolness is all gone by the final act.
He's totally exposed.
Yeah. Like he's just he's raw at that point. Like you can see what he is on the inside. I'm surprised that I got this just because after 7 hours of mind numbing, like it's strange that I was able to be cognizant of that arc.
Like it was at points it was a running gag that you started up of just like Char is the main character in this thing. And it's really just Char is the most fleshed out character by far throughout these films.
Yeah. The movie cares a lot more about its villains than it does. It cares more about villains and side characters than it ever does its main character or anyone who could be like a second main character's deuterologist or whatever you call them.
And you can see like when you're trying to make a war as bad story, you want to have like that sense of there's people below the positions of power and abuse that are just in just as shitty a situation as you are, and the fact that we're killing each other is the product of systemic problems. Like that's clearly something it's trying to do. But at the same time, it comes at the cost of you not caring about any of the leads.
Yeah.
Char is the closest to a main character because he's the only one who actually has depth.
And he acts like a main character as well, because as we've pointed out, to him he is the main character. So that kind of helps kind of solidify that, because he acts like one, like the whole world is about him. So that kind of leads into that as well.
He's got that natural charismatic gravity.
And
we need to free... or something he bullshits on about in Char's counterattack a lot. He starts to say it in Zeta, but by counterattack is one of his shitty radicalized talking points is we need to free our souls from the weight of gravity. And this leads to talking... he basically tries to recruit a confused teen girl by saying, your parents hate you because their souls are weighted by gravity. That's why we gotta kill Earth. We'll do Char's counterattack at some point.
What? No!
No. You have no idea how fucking insane Char's counterattack is. Scene after scene in that is, like, farcical in how bad they are.
I don't know if I want to see Gundam ever again. I want to forget that Gundam ever existed.
Would you be interested in seeing, like, stuff in this setting by other people, though? People who aren't Yoshiyuki Tano and might understand filmmaking.
It's a bit like with Kazumogatari, where you talked about how it had changed. Apparently it had a TV show or something afterwards, and they changed things. Before, sorry. You sure it was only before? So the movie was the last thing that happened?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And it was supposed to happen much earlier.
Oh.
But it went into that crazy production hell where every artist had creative anxiety for, like, 6 years.
Oh. Well, I'm sorry. I must have misunderstood that. Either way, though, I still had that same point of, like, I'd rather just watch something in different universes doesn't remind me of that. Like it's
There's too much connection to this traumatic day that
Yeah.
you don't want to go back to it in any
like
form.
it's not like it's kind of interesting, but it's not that interesting. It's not. It's like it's something that I personally am quite into, the kind of sci-fi universe that it tries to set up in a very broad way. Like I love the idea of colonies and like that kind of politics in space and stuff like that. Like I'm into that, but as much as I'm into that, it's not so unique that I would need
You'd have to go to Gundam to
yeah,
compare.
like I can find something else that's probably not anime. Okay, like it's very similar to The Expanse, for instance.
Well, it's okay, Matt. You'll be getting some. You'll be getting something like this in a couple of years.
Oh,
Because you see, a couple of months ago, Legendary Pictures announced they are producing a Mobile Suit Gundam movie.
oh my gosh! Did they say what it's based on? Is it just the original
that's
series?
all they said. We are doing something and we're talking to people. This is the second time. It's the second time it's happened in Hollywood. The third time in Western film producers. As part of the 20th anniversary of Gundam's airing, there is a film called G Savior, a live-action Gundam movie made by Canadians. And it is everything that description is evoking in your mind.
I think I've watched it. I'm pretty sure
I might have shown you G Savior.
Yeah,
It's hilarious. It has like the guy dying at the end.
Yeah, yeah, and he's like screaming or something.
Screaming at the camera.
Yeah.
Okay,
I've watched that.
You've done G Savior. Yes. that is a Gundam thing, and no one wants to acknowledge it. There was an attempt in about '86 to get a Hollywood project going. The big idea was to use computer visuals as special effects as a real pioneering thing. The group of visual effects people who were making that prototype, once the project fell through, they used the tech they'd developed to do the effects for The Last Starfighter.
That's interesting trivia.
One more interesting trivia about this project.
Sure.
The art director, Sid Mead. Blade Runner's art director.
Wow.
And this contact resulted in him being the designer for the mechanical units in 1999's Turn A Gundam. If you look over on a shelf over there, you can see there's this little green thing.
Yeah.
Next to the little gunbuster.
Huh.
Yeah, that is a Sid Mead art designer for... Yeah, it's a Turn X sitting over there. And that's by the art director for Blade Runner.
You should put like a link to a picture of that in the.
Google the Turn X.
All right, fine. You do it. Says
It's
the
really good in
podcast
Gundam
host.
versus Gundam.
This probably has nothing to do with anything really, but this movie. But I guess, as an aside, just quickly, like I guess it does make sense that with Hollywood looking for any kind of brand recognition at all these days to make franchises and new movies, like it makes sense to turn to anime, and I'm surprised it's done it so little other than with Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah, there's this... No, I mean, there's essentially a form of racial discrimination that's long gone of just, you don't touch the animes. Dragon Ball Evolution, bombed. Ghost in the Shell, bombed. You don't do it. But, I mean, the James Cameron Battle Angel Alita movie is coming out in a couple of months. We've got this project happening now. I think we might be starting to see more of this sort of thing happen.
As cynical as it is, like I feel like just basic greed and like a complete lack of any creative originality at all kind of just leads to it doesn't matter if Dragon Ball Z bombed how many years ago or if one Ghost in the Shell movie bombed. Like I feel like eventually
The classic Hollywood approach. Yeah, just make enough investments and one will hit.
Yeah.
And then you make all the money.
and then
Good Hollywood model. Not the safe bets model. You got anything else you want to say about Gundam? I'm feeling like we should wrap this up here. It's been like 83 minutes. So half the length of one of these movies.
Jesus. This was a real
This was a day.
This was bad. These are bad movies. Like we talked about, I know Char sounded semi interesting in that.
Watch the TV show if you're gonna if you want your char fix.
Yeah, don't do that either. I don't know. Fine, I guess I haven't watched the TV show.
Go dig
These
up
movies
some
are
It's Not
terrible.
Over memes.
These movies are just awful. No, I guess it was actually you who asked this question early on, and because there's just so much other stuff to talk about, and it was just like as part of like your Tomino like thesis or like just asking questions about him. You said, how did this capture the imaginations of people, despite being so terrible? Do you have like a short answer for that, or like any kind of
there's
answer?
these little flashes, there's these ideas. You've been seeing the way I've been extrapolating the ideas it wants to get across.
Sure.
And how you can see how there's elements in the text that would back up what I'm saying. They're just not assembled quite well. And when it's 1979, what else is there that's doing these things at all?
I guess I don't know. I wasn't around.
It's like, it's Blake 7, and there's no Japanese dub of Blake 7. So it's like, you've got Star Trek, you've got Star Wars, and there's nothing else that's quite trying to take sci-fi from the angle that this was.
Yeah.
And that's going to stick in your memory. And, like, some of these images, like, there's a lot of really bad off-model animation and weird perspective shots in the TV show even more so. And, like, that's going to lead to some evocative imagery. For decades, Yoshiyuki Tomino was furious about the final design of the Gundam, which is essentially a white armored samurai with a red chin and blue, yellow, and red painted throughout its chest and legs. He hated it. He really wanted this dull grey, like grey or khaki.
Sounds like him.
Were the options he wanted to like have, an authentic military look. Let's see if I can find this. Okay, here was a set of designs that he would have preferred to use, Matt.
I like the middle one.
Yeah, the gun cannon idea at that point, and you can see the sorts of things that he was wanting to achieve there. But in 2010, a commemorative statue of the original Gundam was erected in Odaiba. And it was when he finally saw that and saw the huge throngs of people who'd walked by it, that he finally was able to come to terms with, like, it wasn't what I wanted, but this meant something to people. And I guess I'm okay with that.
I'm not even a big fan of like overly humanoid mechs, but even I didn't think it looked that bad. I thought it looked alright. It didn't like throw me out of the movie or anything like that. It's a fair design. And like the idea that it's colorful, I mean, like, it's not like they were trying to be stealthy with it. It's usually in the middle of space and it's shooting guns and trying to hit people with swords. Like, I don't think camouflage is a particularly useful element of the Gundam. Like,
it's a vibe, It's Marbo.
Yeah. Like, I feel like it looks fine. I think it looks like a pretty decent mech. So that's just my opinion.
I'll get into like the idea of the semiotics of piloted robots another time, I think, because this one's gone long enough. Have you got the final thoughts that you wanted to say? You said you had something.
Oh no, it was just that. It was just that question about Tomino and like why it had such an enduring legacy. So I almost feel sad that it.
Yeah, I think it's ultimately like it's one of those fun things when you look back at groundbreaking works. Is a lot of them are pretty wonky, but they can. When you just have that right creative spark, as wonky as it can be the spark that starts the flame, that lights the resistance of the new age.
Oh my god.
Coming next week, not The Last Jedi.
Also, hopefully not Gundam.
Talk to you next time.
Bye. Goodbye.